up? We are live, and it's your boy, Erick Esteban, back with episode 5 of Miscellaneous and Brown. This is going to be another solo, dolo, just me episode, but I said something last episode that bothered me, and I said, y'all don't want to hear me babble for 30, 40 minutes, but that's the point of podcasting. That's literally the point of podcasting, is for me to speak on these things that I want to speak on and share my story. So I thought I would take this opportunity, episode 5, to share my story and how I got here, how I got to this point, and how I'm now running 2 different podcasts and hopefully starting up a third. But how I got here and my story as a young Chicago actor, and and the stuff that still motivates me to this day. Because if you listen to episode 4, the last episode, The Making of Unemployable, which is kind of me telling the story behind the filming of my second full-length comedy special titled Unemployable. If you haven't seen my first comedy special called Miscellaneous Brown, you can watch that on YouTube. It's available on YouTube. Just type in Miscellaneous Brown in the YouTube search, and it will be literally the first thing that pops up on that term, because it's pretty much a unique term to me, because it was a nickname given to me when I was coming up in Chicago when I first started acting. So to kind of give you when I first started acting, this was in the late 90s, probably 1996, I graduated college, and I was hell-bent, ready to become an actor. I was going to be an actor. I was going to be the best Filipino-American comedic actor in the world. I wanted to be Filipino Eddie Murphy. That said, I was terrified to do stand-up. I didn't even try. I knew I was funny, but I wasn't brave enough, and I maybe not. Bravery isn't necessarily the thing, because I've never lacked that in any category, and so throughout my career I've always been pretty brave. But maybe it was just more of I didn't think that I could. Imposter syndrome type of thing, where nah, not me. That's Eddie Murphy who can do that stuff, and I can't do that. So I started at Improv Olympic and Second City, and I was part of the last class of Del Close. That's right, Del Close, the godfather of American comedy, the guy who's pictured the white bearded gentleman who you see in every comedy club's painted on the wall or in a mural. And like I saw a mural of his face in New York at the Pit, the People's Improv Theater in New York. So I know that Del Close's comedic influence and reaches far and wide. And I was in the last class of Del Close. And from that class, I went to Second City. And during those days, you had to audition for the conservatory. So I auditioned. I went to the audition for the conservatory at Second City. And after the audition, the people who were auditing the audition approached me and said, "You don't need to go to the conservatory. You're just going to go straight to BizCo. Come every Wednesday to the writing session, and then we'll put you in a show as soon as you're ready." This normally does not happen. It didn't happen back then. It probably doesn't happen very much now. But it was kind of a sign for me to think, okay, well, comedy is probably where I'm going to live and I'm going to stay for at least a little while. But then, confrontations with different political differences and also just representational differences, where I kind of wanted to start doing Filipino characters. And, at that point in time in the late 90s, it was just a funny voice. People really didn't, representation wasn't really there to where the, Filipino wasn't a household word. When I was in Little League, the kids, after baseball practice, they walked up to me and said, "Hey, think you're pretty good." And I said, "Hey, yeah, I'm Filipino." And they literally said, "What the fuck is that?" Like, it just wasn't in their realm of thought, which, that's just how it was back then. But I pushed for Filipino American representation at Second City. And not to say that it was a confrontational thing, but more of a just a, okay, if I can't do these characters, then maybe I'll try different theaters. So I went to different theaters and I did, black box theaters and all these different theaters in Chicago, and Chicago theater, and all the people that I worked with in Chicago theater, from Straw Dog to Northlight to Trapdoor to Pegasus Players, all these different theater companies that I worked with. It's almost too many to name, to be honest. I worked with the Goodman, Steppenwolf, Teatro Vista, all these different theater companies that basically raised me as an actor and as an artist, as a writer, as a director, because it showed me what to do when you're not on stage. It showed me how a director operates, how a stage manager operates, how a lighting operator operates. I learned all aspects of theater and production from Chicago theater. And the culmination of that was getting cast in The Romance of Magna Rubio at Victory Gardens Theater. Because I'd been doing it now at this point, I'd been doing it for about 8 years. I'd been acting for about 8 years. And I hadn't really been able to play a Filipino character. Mostly it was Latino characters. There was one time where I had cornrows in my hair, and I played African American character. I've done. That's part of how I got the title for my first comedy special, Miscellaneous Brown, because that's what I was Miscellaneous Brown, and but then when I got a chance to audition for The Romance of Magna Rubio, because you're like a Chicago actor, you're reading all the different breakdowns of all what the theaters are doing for every season, and I saw The Romance of Magna Rubio and Filipino American story, la la la, and I'm like, okay, there were 5 roles in this show. If I don't get cast, this might be the universe telling me that I might need to choose a different career path. Because at this point, I'd learned to be a stage manager. I'd learned to be, I'd talk to my agents. I'd learned all aspects of the business. So I thought that maybe if I didn't get cast in this, because here's this first time in Chicago where they're doing an all Filipino American ensemble and an all Filipino American show based on a Filipino American poet, Carlos Bulosan. And I'm like, if I don't get cast in this, and there are 5 roles, if I don't get one of those, I think I might need to figure out another path. So we went to the audition. I read the script, did this stuff, sang. We had to do it was like a whole musical audition, because we had to do all the different things in that production. And then we auditioned as a group. Loy Arsenis, the director, he made us all audition as a group. Beautiful, brilliant director. I mean, he's been nominated for a whole bunch of different things on Broadway and off Broadway. He's a brilliant director and an artist, but he runs his auditions a little crazy. And so remember, there's 5 roles, and there were about, I'd say 25 to 30 dudes, Filipino guys in there. And I looked around, and I knew, I'd been in the game for a minute, so I knew all my competition. I knew who was going to be good and who I didn't have to worry about. Because it's all competition, right? It's all, especially in an audition, and especially if it's in a group and you're all in the same room. And so I did everything that I could to make sure that Loy Arsenis knew the hell I was at the end of that group audition. And then at the end, when everybody kind of dispersed and I started walking back to my car down the block, I hear, Erick! Erick! And then Loy Arsenis was standing in front of Victory Gardens Theater yelling my name. And I was like, so I walked back. I was only like a half a block away, so I walked back, and he said, so Erick, are you available for the dates? La la la, and he gave me the dates. And I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm totally, my schedule is clear. You just let me know and I'll be there for the first day of rehearsal. And he goes, okay, good. We'll be in touch. And he walked back into the theater. And man, if I tell you that was the first time that, well, and I've repeated this theme for a minute, but the universe tells you when you're on the right path. And I had given myself that ultimatum that if I didn't get cast in this, that I was gonna, that I was gonna try and figure out another career path. But then I got cast. And not only did I get cast, but right after the audition, the director, this guy that I wanted to impress, ran up after me at the audition and screamed my name and asked me about my availability to make sure that I was going to be able to do the show. And that was a feeling like no other. And as far as like validation, and then doing the show and getting nominated, Jeff nominated for the show as an ensemble. Shout out to all the cast members: Narciso Lobo, Joe Ferranda, Bernardo, rest in peace, Bernardo, and of course my homeboy Chicago. He was there at my first audition for a film audition. We both were auditioning for the same part. Rodney Toe. He played Magno, and magnificently so. But we were all nominated for a Jeff Award for an ensemble, and it was a Chicago actor's dream come true. But then I turned equity, and I was equity. I was an equity actor, so I couldn't do those black box shows and those little, those small Chicago ensemble theater shows anymore. I couldn't do them because I was equity, and so I had to wait for another Filipino American and or Miscellaneous Brown production to come along before I was going to be able to work or get paid. And I spoke with my wife, Meredith, and she was like, well, I've always liked to live by the beach. And so we moved here to California. And I remember watching a lot of my friends who are now even still very, very successful. And I remember, during that time, I was still with, I was kind of Jane Alderman's teaching assistant for a minute at Act One Studios before I left for Los Angeles. And I remember I was telling her about how Eddie Shin was doing this, or Mac Brandt was doing that, or Lenata Washington or Sandra Delgado, or all these people that I came up with were doing so many awesome, cool things on television, in movies. And being really honest, I was jealous. And Jane Alderman gave me the best piece of advice I've ever gotten before I moved to Los Angeles. And I think it's stayed with me now all the years. Actually, by the way, Jane Alderman, rest in peace. She passed away a few years ago. So, but she was a brilliant lady. She cast Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Untouchables and a whole bunch of other Chicago movies that everybody loves. And she was the casting director for those. And literally cast me on my first TV gig in Early Edition. I mean, Jane Alderman was awesome. But she gave me the best bit of advice, and I kept this quote with me for my whole career. And it's, stop worrying about other people's ladders because you'll fall off your own. Let me repeat that. Stop worrying about other people's ladders because you'll fall off your own. And I'll tell you, that has always stayed with me because now I celebrate my friend's success instead of worrying about what about mine. Because at this point, once you realize that if it's a matter of not giving up and sticking around, eventually the story will come to the point where, not to say that I've gotten mine, but I feel as if I'll share with you every time after The Romance of Magno Rubio and after Jane Alderman telling me that quote, that the universe told me to push on and keep going. So we're here in Los Angeles, right? And I came into a lot of money because I booked a TurboTax commercial that ran for the first 4 years of me living here in California. Say that again. It ran for the first 4 years. Commercials don't do that anymore. After the strike in '07, I believe, commercials kind of went the way of the dinosaur, where you could make a living off of one commercial for years and years and years. One of my mentors, Steve Merle, he had a commercial that some old school people, who, if you listen to this, it was like ran in the 70s and the 80s and probably into the 90s, where it was this dude who walked onto a pier, at the edge of a pier, and he was hiding some hot dogs, and he was grilling hot dogs, and then his friend snuck up behind him, and his friend was my friend Steve Merle, and Steve Merle said, "Hey, Johnny's grilling Johnsonville brats, Johnsonville," and it echoed throughout the whole valley, "Johnsonville brats, Johnsonville brats," and everybody descended on that empty pier because everybody wanted a Johnsonville brat. And that commercial ran for 30 plus years. And Steve Merle purchased the acting studio that I was sitting in, that he was teaching me in, and I was getting my basic acting skills in, or he paid the rent and started that business with the money. He bought a boat. He bought a vacation home in Belize. I mean, homie made bank. And I remember when I left, before I left LA, we sat in his office because we had just done this casting workshop with this casting director from LA, and I was trying to make questions, and I had just done my scene, and I nailed the scene. I had just nailed the scene. We were just in this casting workshop with Steve Merle, my mentor, and this casting director from LA, and we were all these other young actors from Chicago, and I had just read my scene, so I'm asking her, "So do you think I should take an improv class before I move to LA?" And the casting director stopped me mid-sentence and said, "Honey, go. You're ready. Go to LA. They're ready. You're ready. I don't know if they're ready for you." And I looked at Steve, and I had this moment with Steve, and then I met with him in his office the next day, and he said these words to me, and I swear to God, I'll never, ever, ever forget these words. I mean, like, you watch out for your mentors is what I'm saying. If you're listening to this as a young actor, as a young comedian, watch out for your mentors and watch out for these little droplets of wisdom that they give you, like Jane Alderman. Don't worry about anybody else's ladder, or you'll fall off your own. Or he was almost like a prophet in the way he kind of set my career out. He said, "Erick, you're probably going to work a bunch when you first get to LA because, you're new. You're a new face, so they're going to book you a bunch, probably book a bunch of commercials. Maybe if you're lucky, you get some guest stars and some co-stars. That'd be great. And then you're going to get into your 30s and into your 40s, and you're probably not going to work a lot because in Hollywood, the stories aren't written for that age, especially for people of color, and especially, Filipino dudes." So he said, "You're going to have to really forge your own path, build your own thing." That was his advice to me. But then he also said, at the end of his little prophecy about my career, he said, "But when you hit 50, when you hit middle age, you're not going to stop working." So I don't know why I've had a lot of different interactions with a lot of different mentors, a lot of different directors, a lot of different acting teachers, and I never really remembered every word of that interaction, except for Steve. After that casting director told me, "Shut up, you're ready. We'll just hope that LA's ready for you." And so then, Chicago, Lil Rel said it in the Shannon Sharp interview, his most recent Shannon Sharp interview. Chicago makes you feel like you're already a star. It gives you the juice and the confidence to come out to LA and feel like you can conquer this whole place. And I did. First 4 years, I booked a TurboTax commercial that my only line, guys, the only line was "cha-ching." And for the next 4 years, whenever I heard my dumb ass say, cha-ching, during tax season, I knew I was going to be getting some residual checks from my agent. But when that commercial stopped airing and TurboTax decided to do some new commercials, because the new commercial agreement made it so they didn't have to pay me for a 4 year span for an old commercial that cost them a whole bunch to make. Well, now I got dropped. I got dropped from my commercial agent that was set up from my talent agent, Stewart Talent, in Chicago. And I got dropped. And coming from a guy who in Chicago booked everything I was on, I was a working actor, working in every set that you could think of in Chicago. I was working. Stewart Talent had me working. But after the commercial stopped running and after I stopped booking commercials, they dropped me. And I was kind of forced to work with a family business. And I don't really want to talk too much about that because I love my family and I love my parents, I love my sister, I love my immediate family, and I love Broome Street General Store, the store that we built and created. But it took away from my career. So, that's still something I'm working on. So it's not something I really want to share. But at the same time, the only thing that I would say is it's better, when they say don't mix work and family, it's probably best to do that, because once I was able to stop working there with my family, I was able to fully concentrate on my career. But I skip over a whole bunch of stuff. That was kind of the point where I had to decide whether I was going to be an actor or what I was going to do. Again, another point of decision, another point of ultimatum. And so instead of giving myself an ultimatum on an audition or pressure on one role or another, I decided to go to therapy. And I went to therapy, and man, it saved my life. Therapy saved my life. I'll share with you. I'll spare you the details. But I was meeting with my therapist for close to 6 months, and we discussed a whole bunch of different things. And by the end of it, she said, "It sounds like you've always wanted to be a stand-up comedian. So why don't you try?" And so I did. And I sent her, and I said, I remember my last words to my therapist is, "I'll send you a link to my first show. You don't have to come, but just know that I'll send you a link to my first show." And I did. I sent her a link, and it was a really powerful moment for me, because it was not only a show that I was, it was a really great moment for me as an artist to realize that you don't have to have momentum necessarily to know to keep going, or you don't have to have a good thing happen. Sometimes it's introspection and self just examining yourself and the journey you've been on. And that therapy really helped me to decide to start doing stand-up. And man, this story has gone and veered in so many places, but basically all the roads in my artistic life and in my creative life and in my comedic life lead to stand-up comedy. And that's why I'm so proud of my first comedy special, Miscellaneous Brown, because it's a culmination of, I started doing stand-up comedy when I was 40, and I filmed that comedy special when I was 48. So it took me 8 years to write that and learn how to perform that and hone every joke and hone every single thing, which is why now that I've just come back fresh from my Chicago headliner, it's and the performance and filming of my second special called Unemployable, it's that much more of a, because, you know, when you talk about music artists and when you talk about hot people who come out with their first album and it's fire, and it's always the follow-up album that, you know, proves their longevity for themselves. I would think, even for myself, because that's what Unemployable was for me. If I could do another hour of written material that I had prepared, but also freestyle a little bit because of the environment, because it's stand-up and that's what you do, but I could do another hour and we could get another hour of, for a special, man, I knew that this was the thing and this was my path. And sure enough, that's what we did. And so I share this story with you only because I started this podcast under the assumption that you guys had all watched Miscellaneous and Brown season 1 in 2020 when I was doing that podcast, and or all of you were following me on Instagram or whatever else. And I think that's what social networking has kind of convinced us all of, is that we're all little celebrities in our own little worlds. And to be honest, if you guys are going to come on this journey with me and in this podcast, I really want you to know who I am as a person. Me, Erick Esteban, where I came from, what I'm doing, what my dreams are, what my goals are. And so part of me sharing the beginning stories of my acting, and you know, I'll keep sharing stories throughout the different episodes and the different interviews that I'll have with other people. But part of it is because I really want you guys to know who you're listening to, because I understand and I know that podcasts are conversations that we listen to when we're going about our day, but they keep us company. So I want you to know who you're talking to, who you're listening to, who is telling you things, and where he comes from, and what I'm about. And so now that when I got to kind of rewind back my story of LA a little bit, only because part of the reason why I started this podcast, part of the reason, and basically one of my main issues and why I love living in California, is that I am a medical marijuana patient. I am a cannabis advocate. And living here in Los Angeles, it makes that much easier, because I moved to Los Angeles in 2006. Cannabis became medical and recreationally legal in Chicago, I believe, in 2020. So there's a span of 15 years where I took advantage of the fact that I live in California and I had easy access to cannabis, because cannabis for me, and I'm going to say it, cannabis is a medicine, because the more I research it, the more I learn about cannabis and cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system in my body and in your body and in every vertebrae's, any vertebrate, any animal with a vertebrae's body. We all have an endocannabinoid system, which regulates the cannabinoids and chemicals that regulate brain function and circulatory function and all different types of functions. And part of this podcast is educating people on the medical benefits of cannabis, because I use it every day. It regulates my ADHD to the point where I can do this. I can podcast and I can focus. And it makes my brain move right. That's what cannabis does for me. And when I share with you the main political reason why cannabis is one of my main issues, I have a quote from 1937. 1937. Because in 1937, that's when the Manongs, the Filipino American immigrants that first immigrated here, the people who were the story of Romance of Magna Rubio. And when I learned and researched the character of my character, Claro, and all the different characters in that play, they were the Manongs. So in 1937, this guy, Harry Esteban, was talking about the Manongs when he said this as testimony to the U.S. Congress supporting the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. In the Bureau of Prohibition, he was the first commissioner of the Treasury Department and Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Okay, so this is Harry Esteban saying this. There are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. So, in other words, Filipinos were specifically mentioned and used to demonize marijuana and cannabis as a plant, but also demonize themselves as men who were out to steal white men's wives, which we probably did nab a few of your wives because we are very, very handsome and very, very charming. We didn't need marijuana to steal your wives. That's all I'm going to say. But anyway, I digress. The Watsonville riots was a result of some of these things, some of these different testimonies in Congress that convinced white people that cannabis was bad and that Negroes and Hispanics and Filipinos and Filipino entertainers were using this drug to lure their wives away from them. It was ridiculous, but it was also now my calling. It became my calling now to know that Filipinos in 1937, Filipinos weren't mentioned. I mean, when in Filipino American history are we even specifically mentioned in Congress or in a testimony for Congress? This is probably one of the only ones, especially during that era, 1937, but Filipinos and entertainers. Guess what I am? I am a Filipino entertainer. So they used people who were like me to demonize this drug, this plant, and demonize the Manongs to make them out to be what they weren't. And to be honest, it really makes me mad that there's now all these multi-state corporations that have taken over the cannabis industry. And another reason why I'm so happy to live here in California is that I grow my own cannabis now. And I've now stopped giving my money to the bigger... I don't contribute to big cannabis anymore because now I grow my own. And so those are the two big issues, political issues for me, in as far as being able to keep growing my own and have the freedom to grow my own, and also being able to distribute and get this medicine, because that's what it is medicine, out to the people who need it. Because I'll share with you when I told my parents, because when I turned 40, I was sneaking out in my alley and I was like, trying to smoke a joint before my parents got there so I wouldn't be so stressed. And I was like, you know what? No way. No, I'm 40 years old. This is my house. I am going to tell my parents. I'm going to stop hiding this from anybody. And I'm just going to tell them. And I told my dad, and he was like, I smoked cigarettes when I was 6 years old. So, if it makes you feel good, do whatever you want. I was pretty much what I expected from my dad. But my mom was brown Nancy Reagan growing up. And, she would be like, you're going to die. You're going to die. If you try that, you're going to die. That's what she would say. And so I decided to tell her. I said, Mom, I smoke weed every day. I smoke cannabis every day. I'm Filipino Snoop Dogg. I smoke weed all the time. And my mom said, can you get me some? And now my mom eats edibles to help her fall asleep because she's a 2-time cancer survivor. And so, cannabis is a medicine, and I'm here to advocate for it. I've been out. The reply has been out to the mayor of Burbank, because I live here in California. I live in Burbank, California, and we don't have not a one cannabis shop in Burbank, but we have the second per capita largest amount of gun stores in America, second only to a county in Florida. We have 17 gun stores for a population of less than 150,000 people. 17 gun stores and not one cannabis shop. So stay tuned to the Miscellaneous and Brown podcast, because I'm going to ask the mayor of Burbank what's up with that and what's the progress on bringing cannabis business and cannabis industry, which people are projecting to be valued at over $31 billion globally this year. But I still got to volunteer and shovel manure for my kids' garden at the school. Come on, guys. We got to straighten out our priorities, and we've got to just figure this out. But also, the call is out to Jessica Caloza. She's going to be out here, and she's going to be on the show very soon. And we're going to talk about her run for state assembly as being the first Filipina American to be elected to state assembly here in California. And we're probably going to get Isabel Jurado back to talk about her qualifying primary win and how she's running to be the first Filipina American to be on the Los Angeles City Council. So we've got so many guests coming up, and then we've also got my surprise co-host that I'm going to leave as a surprise until she is ready for me to announce that she's ready to podcast and she's ready to be here and do what she's doing. But I am so excited to be part of this and have her be part of the Miscellaneous and Brown podcast. But we'll leave that for a surprise and as a cliffhanger for this episode. But again, we're coming up on 40 minutes. And again, this episode was, again, another check-in episode, because I'm still trying to line up as many guests as I can that are going to inspire you to be a bigger and better part of your community. But in the meantime, I wanted to share my story with you and tell you who the guy is that hosts this podcast that you've decided to devote your time to. Because I know at the end of the day, time is our only luxury. And I want to thank you guys for giving me some of your time and listening to me share my story. So if you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, review, everything that you can do to interact with the podcast on whatever medium you listen to, Apple, Spotify, whatever it is. Please write a review. Give me a 5-star rating, because it only helps me get into more ears, more eyes, because we're going video soon, guys. We're going to go video soon, especially when we got bigger guests. And we already have one video that if you want to watch, you can go to 1-2 Productions on YouTube and watch my interview with Isabel Jurado, because that interview is probably one of the best and most fulfilling interviews I've ever had in my life. And it was so cool to talk to her. And you would want to, and if you want to just listen to the audio of that, go back Miscellaneous Brown episode 1, listen to all of those, episode 2, episode 3, listen to all of it, and share this with anybody who you think will be inspired by it, enjoy it, and pass the time of their day with me babbling on about whatever I'm thinking about. Again, my name is Erick Esteban. Thank you guys for listening. This is Miscellaneous Brown episode 5. And we will see you very, very soon.